Oh, I'm so sorry.
No
What an
problem.
alarm.
Hello, everybody. Hello. We are live. This is Welcome to Career Expert Roundtable. I'm Bill, the company's expert. And with me today, I have Amri Celeste, interview coach from the YouTube channel, Amri Celeste, interview coach, joining me today.
Yeah.
Hello, Amri. Thanks for joining me.
Hello. Hi. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, really glad to be here.
Yeah, this is great. So the topic for today is what matters most in a hiring process, how to build quick rapport. So if you are here to learn about that, to brush up on your interview skills, we're going to be talking about this and the importance of rapport and how one can maintain it, can generate it in a job interview. Okay, so we're gonna do that. Also, this is a Q&A. We have questions. If you're seeing us, you should see a chat box near us. Get in the Q&A, get in the chat box and ask some questions, and we will do our best to answer those. I'm not sure if we're going to be taking them as they come in, or we're just going to sort of let them pool to the end, but I guess it depends on how on topic they are. But Amri, so you've had some thoughts on this. So
I have.
the hiring process, rapport. What's the importance of rapport, and why is it a good thing?
So rapport, and I guess first of all, what I mean by rapport, I just wanted to check you. Can you see me clearly? I'm not sure if it's gone a little bit
You're a
fuzzy. It
little
looks
bit
like it
out of
has.
focus, but I can see you
Yeah, it looks
clearly.
a
Yeah,
little out of focus. I'm hoping that can
you can
be
kind of do this thing with your
fixed.
hand. Maybe
Yeah,
I don't know.
maybe
Yeah,
that'll
there we go.
maybe that'll fix it in
Hopefully,
time. I don't know.
in time.
Okay, so yeah, I
There we
mean,
go.
with rapport, yeah, maybe potentially try switching off and on my camera later. But with rapport, what I mean by rapport is in an interview process is creating a connection with your interviewer. So it's creating, if you're in an interview, creating an understanding between you and your interviewer that leaves the interviewer feeling connected with you, rooting for you in the process, and feeling like you can communicate with them in a way that is easy and fluid and leaves them feeling comfortable that you understand them and their ideas. So that's kind of what I mean by building that connection and building rapport.
Yeah, everyone should focus on doing this because my understanding, interviewers generally tend to hire the person that they like the most. If that's not the most important factor, it's very high up. And one of the ways that you can be likable is by creating a rapport and having you click with the person that you're talking to. So that's why this is something that everybody should shoot to do. Now, for some people, it comes naturally. Other people, they really struggle with this. So we're going to talk about maybe some of the things that we can do in an interview to create that.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that you can do is ask questions. So asking questions is an easy way to build your connection and to build confidence by connecting with your interviewer on a deeper level. So it's also getting to know your interviewer. So people generally love talking about themselves when they feel like someone is genuinely interested in what they have to say. So an example of that is something basic, like let's say that you're starting the interview online or you're meeting in person, asking something like, have you had a busy morning? How's your morning been? Just on your way in. There's a lot of candidates that may miss the opportunity to ask questions like that, and some interviewers really appreciate that. So they'll say, oh, it was fine. The focus is a little more on them. And when you have an opportunity to ask questions in the interview, you could ask questions like, what's kept you here for this X amount of time? You started here, you still here. That's obviously a good sign. Because for most of the interview is focusing on you and asking you questions. So it kind of turns the tables a bit and gives you a bit of breathing space. So you're not being assessed for a second. And it allows them to think back on the good things, something positive, why they're still here, and then sharing that. Or what's your favorite thing about working here is another good one as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's very flattering. If somebody asks you for your opinion, or they're asking you how you're doing or anything like that, and like you said, they genuinely feel that the person cares. They're not just making small talk. They're not just saying a token thing because I'm supposed to say something now at this point in the exchange. They're genuinely interested. They say, oh, like, almost like an icebreaker, right? Where you
Yeah.
talk about a common experience, and a common experience would be showing up to this room,
Yeah.
like, did you have any trouble finding the place? That kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That type of question where you could say something and what you would say applies to the other person because they also had to get to this place, right?
Yeah.
Or anything like that. So having a conversation, then being able to ask so many questions and having the person feel like you actually care about the answer, that's definitely the way to go, rather
Yeah.
than having a very forced, formal kind of thing that really feels awkward and really feels unwelcoming, and
Yeah.
nobody particularly enjoys it, right?
Right. And the it's interesting because the more you if you've had a conversation with someone where you barely spoke and at the end of it the other person feels like it was a great conversation, it's just because they were having the opportunity to share and connect with you. So the more you kind of ask questions and the interviewer has a chance to talk about them, the more they kind of psychologically build up that connection with you. So, and if you're in the interview, they already think you can do the job. So you're just kind of deepening that connection with the interviewer. I am going to try to fix this camera issue, so don't be distracted by me in the
Yeah,
background.
it's not, just so
Fine.
you know, it's really not
Yeah.
that noticeable. I mean, it's
Oh,
just a
really?
minor
Okay, it
blurry.
looks really blurry on my side. Maybe it looks
Hmm.
worse, but yeah.
It's fine. We can hear you fine. I
Oh,
can
okay,
see you
fine.
fine.
That's
So
fine
it's
then.
it's it's
Okay.
really good. But I mean, for the people watching, have you ever had a conversation where somebody asks you a question? They say, "Oh, how are you doing?" Or some other question about it. You mentioned that, "Oh, I've worked in this job for 2 years," and they say, "Oh,
Yeah.
do you enjoy doing this kind of work?" So they ask you a question, but then when you start answering, you feel that they just don't care at all about your answer. They only asked you the question because they felt it was necessary. It behooves them to ask a question at that moment, but they really don't care about the answer. They're just doing it as part of etiquette.
Yeah.
Um, right? So hopefully everybody is. You've had a similar experience where that's happened to you, and you just feel the other person doesn't care, right? So we're talking about the opposite of that, right? If someone asks you a question, and I'm sure there's a topic that you could go on about, maybe about a hobby or something you're really interested in, and you start talking, and the other person is genuinely interested in hearing what you have to say on it.
Yeah.
It's a really good feeling, and you end up liking the other person because it's like, wow, you really care about what I think about this, and
Yeah.
it's pleasurable to say your opinion about something, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I
so
think that
imagine if you could
example,
get that in a job interview, right?
yeah.
That's how the interviewer feels about you. That's what
Yeah,
we're talking about. Rapport.
exactly. And I think the example that you gave a moment ago, where you asked them a question about, oh, you've been working here, how long have you been working here, and do you enjoy that aspect? That's really the key as well. Is the way to show that you're genuinely interested is asking follow-up questions on their answer, so specific points in their answer to show that you are interested in listening. That's just an easy way to kind of to build that bond.
Yeah.
And you would want to do that because this could be, it's not just a trick or a technique. You may be working with this person, they could be your boss or your colleague in future, so you would want to you want to get to know them and see what they're like. So and also you can also ask questions about things like the team and like recent projects. Some interviewers, they're at work because they just got bills to pay, that's why they're there, but some of them are genuinely passionate about maybe the company or what they do or their team. And so when you show genuine interest levels, they have a personal bond with you. They think that person really cared about being here. And I've heard managers say this before. They're like, oh, that person was just so passionate, they were just so genuinely interested, and it was just based on the fact that they asked some key questions. So yeah.
I would like to ask you a question, Amri, as
Yeah.
a recruiter. Okay. Um, have you ever been in a situation like where you're interviewing candidates, and
Mhm.
one candidate, they come across as very technically qualified for the job? You feel that they really know their stuff, maybe more so than other candidates.
Yes.
So let's call that candidate A, the sort of really technically qualified one. But then there's a candidate B, another candidate that they may not be as technically qualified, or at least they don't come across as that. meet the minimum requirements, but they might not be as accomplished as candidate A.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the interaction that you had with them in their job interview, and you had a lot of rapport, and
Mm-hmm.
you really enjoyed speaking to them, and you clicked, right, like having a conversation.
Yeah.
Do you feel the temptation to hire that person or to recommend that person over candidate A? Has that ever happened to you?
Well, I think because I'm a recruiter, I do understand that some people are better at building bonds, emotional bonds, very quickly,
Hmm.
and it doesn't always translate to them being working in the role. However, when I work with the hiring managers that I work with as a recruiter, I'd say more than half of the time, I'd almost say 70 to 80% of the time, they would be very, very tempted, if not completely persuaded, to hire that candidate B, the one that has built that bond, um, because they're not necessarily interviewing hundreds or thousands of people over the space
Hmm.
of a decade or two. So they're not necessarily seeing the pattern of, oh, these people get into the job, how many of them pass probation, how many of them are actually great at the job. So
But it's relevant to the job, isn't it? I mean, if
oh,
you can get along with people really well and you're a pleasure to be around, I mean, that makes for a good working environment. That's definitely relevant to the role,
it,
right?
it, it
Yeah.
is it is and it's also that as a recruiter, part of my job is selecting a candidate that the manager will want to hire. So
Yes.
it's a mix between, it almost doesn't matter how I feel about the candidate to a point. So managers will say, oh, what's your expertise, what do you think? But I also get to know managers and know this person will fit well with this person. And it's interesting you said technical, because it's reminded me specifically of someone, a manager I once worked with, who hired the best candidate, who they demonstrated that technically they were brilliant, but that's not
So
common. So I was surprised
the
by,
best candidate from a technical perspective.
yes,
Yeah.
but it stood out because that's not common. That's not really that common, I was surprised because I just realized how uncommon it was, to do that. So
Okay.
generally speaking, managers tend to. I mean, all people tend to go with people that they like. If I was hiring for someone that was working on my own team, would I want someone that I think I probably wouldn't get along with this person? And that's a question that you'd have to kind of think about. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's another example of this actually. And this is just like a side note, getting slightly off topic, but if you think about things like X Factor, the show, or
Mm.
any like pop stars or Fame Academy. I'm not. Did you have all those shows?
We I believe we do. I don't really watch them, but
Yeah,
yes, they ring a bell. The name, like X
the
Factor and stuff.
names,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
kind of panel contestant with the and things like that, and they come onto the show and they've got some talent or they sing.
Mm.
And what's really interesting about those shows is that they place so much emphasis on the contestants' backstory. So it's now over time it became really well known and people you started to make fun of it. But they do spend millions to understand the behavior of viewers and their audience and understand what people like. And they notice
Yeah.
that the more people feel connected, the more they trust the contestant, the more they're rooting
Mm.
for the contestant, and they know that decisions are often made emotionally, and then we sometimes might use logic to try and justify the emotional decision, but that's why
Yeah,
they
that's
spend so much
interesting.
time on that. They say, oh, this person has all these challenges that they went through in life, and even if they're a terrible singer, they've got to the finals, and it's because actually there's a bond that was built with them,
Because you're
partially
with them
through.
every step of the way, right?
Exactly, exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So
That's
yeah,
really
it's
interesting.
yeah. um yeah, so I think I've got a bit off top there,
Well,
but
no, you're
yeah,
right. I mean,
that's
that definitely applies in job interviews. It's all about the first impressions you have with people and how you take to them or you don't, and that's definitely a factor. Some
yeah.
people downplay it, some people play it up a bit, but it's whichever way you slice it, it's definitely a factor. So I guess for the people watching, like if you've never been tuned into this kind of stuff before, this is something that it tends to. Would you say it levels the playing field to a degree? Because you can't really
Yes.
change your technical qualifications instantly, but you can maybe learn how to do this very well, and that can be a real advantage.
Yes, it definitely levels the playing field. So I did a video a long time ago on, I guess the title's maybe a little controversial, which is why skills and experience and degrees don't matter. And the reason is that you can have all of the degrees and skills and experience, but if you can't demonstrate them in a way that is engaging and persuasive and clear in an interview, then it almost, that's why so many people they've got degrees and then they struggle to get into, I was coaching a client a long time ago, and she had paid $20,000 for a coding academy, and had 3 jobs, and she couldn't get into a job once she finished it because
Hmm.
it was just she couldn't pass an interview, and that was the issue. And I thought, it's amazing that people pay so much money to get these education, to get these experience, but then the most important part, which is getting past the gate, which is the interview, is not included in any of this training.
Yeah, this
um,
turns out to be a deal breaker and it comes out of left field. It's this thing that I don't know if they're not educated on the importance of this, or like whatever the reason is, but it's not on their radar. They're not placing importance on it. They're not tuned into it. And like you said, it is the deal breaker. It negates a lot of these other things that they do that takes years and it costs a ton of money and is a huge accomplishment. And in the end, it gets overruled by this stuff, which it seems like a big injustice and it seems like, really stupid, but this is an aspect of human nature that people need to be tuned in on it, because at the end of the day, as an employee, you're working with other people. And if
mm,
people can't work with you or they don't like working with you,
mm.
that is going to be a big factor in any work environment. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And another thing that you can do to build that connection, this comes with some caveats, but it's sharing your challenges. So sharing any challenges that you've had, or any difficulties or adversities, not all, and you share with care. So an example might be, if you're answering a question like what is your weakness, is a good opportunity. That's an opportunity to share something that you've overcome. Kind of like I was saying with the X Factor example, that knowing that someone has overcome a difficult health issue or a family issue, that can it can humanize someone, and it can show authenticity. And that's really important in an interview, because interviewers see so many candidates, and whether it's a hiring manager or a recruiter, and everyone's putting their best foot forward, and everybody knows that. So something that shows a little bit of you can be helpful, so that you can show your growth as well. So an example might be something like, if you struggled with public speaking early in your career, but then it was so important for the role that you did that you took a course, or you joined a local toasting club or something like that, and then you went on to lead presentations at company meetings. That's an example of something that you struggled with, and then you show how you grew from that. But of course, you need to share carefully. So it's not,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
definitely.
It's not an emotional dumping ground in an interview, which I've seen many examples of that. So do keep it to general difficulties, like working very hard on something difficult, like a challenging degree, while balancing work commitments. Maybe adapting to a new environment, or taking on leadership responsibilities. Steer away from topics that could be potentially traumatic for the interviewer, like anything to do with death or trauma, or rather severe
Yeah.
topics like,
Anything that's going to
yeah,
create awkwardness,
yeah,
basically. Yeah. Yeah. That's
yeah.
not the right thing to bring up. Okay. So let's get down to maybe get into the weeds here.
Okay.
We're trying to build rapport. We're talking about how to build rapport with the interviewer. We
Mm,
covered asking questions, giving examples, sharing experiences that they could maybe relate to make you more
mhm.
relatable, more of a real person. Um, what, like, is there something at a more basic level, like smiling, making eye contact, asking questions, like, where would you start with this before we get to sort of more advanced ideas? um, what's your opinion on that, like the beginning, the chapter 1 paragraph 1 of building rapport with somebody?
Yeah. So in the very beginning, it's things that are absolute basics that people might think are standard and, oh, that advice is obvious, but things like arriving early, so joining a call early if you are having a call, arriving at your interview early. All throughout my career in recruitment, I've seen people that join, turn up late, or with a variety of reasons. So things like that, turning up early and waiting. And interviewers and hiring managers have heard all the reasons in the world. So basic things: a strong greeting. So for meeting someone in person, like a strong handshake. And like you said, smiling. Sometimes people forget, especially when they're nervous, to smile. Smile. A smile goes a million ways, a million miles. It works. And also use the interviewer's name, not too much. I don't like it when, if I'm being sold to and someone constantly uses my name, it feels really disingenuous. But just, they would have, you know who you're meeting with, so just, use their name. It's, oh, hi Bill, yeah, it's really nice to meet you. That's
yeah.
that
People respond. Isn't that there's a whole psychological thing on that? People respond to their own name, right? Like, so when someone, like, how does it work when somebody says your name? It's supposed to subconsciously show that, to them, you're important enough that they would commit your name to memory and then use it. And, rather than just, that thing where people introduce themselves, hello, I'm, whatever. And then, it just goes right out right in one ear and out the other. You don't remember their name like 5 seconds after they've introduced themselves.
Yeah.
And like subconsciously, that's kind of a thing where, there's less respect or something there. I'm not sure, but people respond to their name. And yeah, you try and look pleasant and approachable, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people are probably going to be feeling awkward and stressed at a job interview. And if you show it, it kind of doesn't help, right? You have to try and artificially look like you're comfortable and you're enjoying yourself to a degree.
Yeah,
you're at
exactly.
ease. Like that helps. It helps other people want to talk to you and want to interact with you, I guess, right?
Yeah, it does. And one of the things that I bleat on about constantly is about doing practices beforehand. Just practice interviews, just practicing being in an interview setting. So a friend or somebody that or if you don't want to do this, if you don't have a friend or somebody that you live on your own, you don't have anyone to practice with, then practice with yourself. So just record yourself, and you will be surprised at that. But it's when you do these things, it gets smoother. And when you're actually in an interview setting, you find that you relax much quicker and you start to ask natural questions like, oh, how was your day today? Did you have much work on? Has it been a busy day? Whereas when you're really nervous, people often forget to smile. They forget the interviewer's name. They forget to ask basic questions. And that positive first impression is one really, really great way to build quick rapport. So I always say, if you can stand it, record yourself and watch it back, and you will get to see and hear what the interviewer is. And then that's a great opportunity to tweak anything
that's great advice. So we've talked about smiling. We've talked about eye contact. You've talked about like asking questions of the other person. That's another one, basically rehearsal. So you could rehearse, like you said, like recording yourself like on camera and do it that way. Or you could rehearse with a friend or a buddy if you have access to another person, to do like a mock interview with them and kind of go through the motions. And it's going to feel awkward in both of those. Some people, it feels awkward when you video yourself for the first time and you have to play it back and you hear the sound of your own voice and all this. It feels awkward.
Horrible. The first time is horrible.
Yeah, but this is so good. Great. It's a good thing. Yeah, because you're trying to overcome those awkward feelings of being uncomfortable, being out of your comfort zone. Same with rehearsing with another person. It may feel weird and strange and awkward, but that's good because the purpose of doing it is to overcome that awkward, uncomfortable sensation and learn to appear comfortable and cheery and pleasant despite perhaps feeling out of your comfort zone. That's a great thing. So people can rehearse. And I would recommend anyone watching this, if you want to build rapport, definitely do this. For the amount of time and effort it takes to do this, everyone should do this.
I just add also, you can either feel comfortable, you can either feel uncomfortable and nervous before the interview or in the interview. And I would say it's 100% better to feel uncomfortable and awkward and weird before the interview and then get used to that feeling until you get comfortable with it. And then when you get into the interview, you're not dealing with that same challenge.
Yeah, I think to like as I recall my own experiences years and years ago, I think the idea is that if you okay, let's say the thing you were talking about, like filming yourself, okay, on camera.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you're sort of filming yourself, do a mock interview or ask questions or engage in opening pleasantries with somebody like a greeting. And maybe you feel awkward and uncomfortable and a bit silly doing it. But then when you hopefully play back your video and you look at yourself and you're like, hey, I don't seem that awkward and uncomfortable. There's a disconnect between how I feel or how I felt a moment ago when I was shooting that and the impression I'm giving when I'm observing myself. And you see like, okay, so even though I might feel awkward and, uncomfortable and a bit silly, that's not really translating when someone meets me and I go through the motions of looking them in the eye and smiling and asking them about their day or, whatever. And then you go, oh, okay. So I can appear totally professional, even if I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And then that gives you a bit more confidence in this whole
Yeah.
process. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, um,
Agree.
yeah. So you talked about, okay, asking questions, examples, um, sharing vulnerabilities it was another one.
Yeah, so I mean, I touched on it a little earlier. I think I kind of went into some of the topics, but that was just
Yeah.
sharing things that you struggled with. So the couple of examples that I gave were like one of them was public speaking, and the other is, let's say that you were studying at the same time as you were working. So that could be something that you share to show that whenever you say that you struggled with something, it's you sharing that you're vulnerable. So that's how you share vulnerabilities. And you can take an opportunity to do that when you're answering questions like, what is your weakness? Even in tell me about yourself, if appropriate. So don't make that the whole thing. Don't make it a long story about something difficult, but you can say, well, let's say, oh, I moved here from etc. I had to learn a new language and I did this, and that was my first couple of years, and then I moved into this career. But you can share that that was quite challenging because of these reasons, and that's an opportunity for you to just share little vulnerabilities along the way, and those help to build up a connection in the background.
See, it seems to me like, okay, that makes sense, but it would have to be a vulnerability that kind of satisfies some requirements. Number one, the other person would have to have gone through something similar so that they can create a bit of a connection with you, right? Because if you say something like, oh, I struggled with this, and it's something that the other person knows nothing about, they don't have any kind of frame of reference,
Yeah.
it seems like that may not sort of fit the bill. It would have to be something more universal, more, that almost anybody you meet, you can assume that they've had similar experiences to you, like maybe the fear of public speaking or something like that. It's almost
Yeah, the
universal.
public speaking example. I
Yeah.
mean, who is born naturally? I mean, maybe some people are, actually, to be fair, but I think most people can appreciate why that would be why
Yeah.
that would be terrifying for a
Like
lot of
you said
people.
something earlier, you said like nothing that would create, or like words to the effect of nothing that would create awkwardness.
Yeah.
Certain topics you wouldn't mention because it's just kind of awkward. But some other guidelines, to me, it seems like you would have to say something that the other person can relate to. So it can't be something so specialized or idiosyncratic that they may not relate to it.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
would there and would there be more to that? Like another constraint would also be something that is not going to reflect poorly on you when it comes to evaluating you for this job. Like if you say, oh, I can't do math, or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
it might be somewhat universal. It might be, it might create a connection. But if this job is related to technical math sort of things, that might not be the thing to say, right? So
Exactly.
yeah.
And I hear that a lot, strangely enough.
What, the math
I
thing?
oh no, just somebody sharing a vulnerability or
Hmm.
what they consider to be a weakness that is in direct opposition to the role. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was recently actually looking for an admin assistant, and I interviewed someone who said, I want to make sure that the role I'm doing isn't just, loads of admin and entering data onto a sheet, and
Yeah.
I really want I want it to be challenging, and I want it to make a really big difference. And I thought, oh, I'm going to
That's
have
what
to
the job is.
explain that that's what the job is.
Yeah.
I'm going
Yeah.
to have to explain that. So I was, I don't know that I'm as surprised by it as I used to be, but every now and then it still is kind of, I think it's maybe nerves that makes somebody kind of say, just kind of blurt things out. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's not just let's say that when you say it's something that people can relate to, and something that is not in direct opposition to the job. So even if you're going into a role where you'd be doing lots of presentations, you can say the public speaking thing, but you can say, when I first started in my career X a long time ago. So that might be suitable if you have a long career in that industry, and you're saying, when I first started, this was a challenge, and this is how I've worked in it. And right now, I now do presentations on a weekly basis. Or if you're speaking to someone in leadership, saying something like, I had to manage the team there, or I had to project manage something, and I had to get a group together and manage that. So I was taking on leadership responsibilities, and that was challenging at first for this reason. That's something that the person you're speaking to will likely be able to relate to if they are in leadership. So something that either is relevant to the person, something universal, or something that is highly relevant to the role, and something that you overcame.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It would work. I think it would definitely work under the context. But
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that's true. Like if you say something that you're almost like revealing a critical weakness that would render you unsuitable for the job or something. Yeah, it wouldn't be a good. So that's why it's important to vet these. I think that's the takeaway. It works, but don't leave it to the spur of the moment to think of something. Maybe just kind of think of this stuff ahead of time, and
Mm-hmm.
that might help. Sharing values as a means to create rapport with an interviewer. How would that work?
Yeah, I'm sharing what you care about can be very important. I think I say use a reasonable judgment, because of course things you care about could be, like, for example, a political topic, or something that is generally controversial. Even if you think that your interviewer holds the same opinion as you, because there could be a lot of different reasons that people jump to that conclusion. It can be, oh, they're from the same background, or they have the same this, or they, whatever. Don't be tempted to share anything that would generally be controversial. But yeah, let's say, for example, you are interviewing somewhere where they have a sustainability goal, or that's just part of the ethos of the company, and you care about the environment, then definitely share that as your value. You can slot it into your answer to tell me about yourself, or your background, or anything like, why should we hire you? You can slot it in there. You can mention it multiple times. But yeah, sharing things that you care about, that are beyond just, I care about doing a good job, beyond that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
That can really help to build rapport and connection with the interviewer.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And once again, I imagine similar constraints, like you just said, nothing controversial, something
Yeah.
more universal that, the majority of people would probably be able to relate to,
Mm-hmm.
or they may have had their own experiences with that causes them to warm to you because, they can relate to that
Yeah.
goal or those values. So definitely doing research as a means of creating rapport. What would you say about
Yeah.
that?
So I think with research, I mean, research is like a big thing that I go on and on about, but it's interesting because I've seen this a long time ago that I've seen this piece of advice about searching the interviewer's personal preferences, which I have my own views on, and because I've seen it in the modern day, but I first saw it years ago. It was a story about somebody that searched the interviewer's golfing preferences, and then they were talking about golfing, and the interviewer really connected with them, and it was, they got the job. Personally, I don't recommend that, because I just don't personally like that advice. I think that some people may find that intrusive, and there's other ways that you can research to build connections, like, for example, things like understanding the culture of the company. And let's say that the company is a vegan company. there's a chance that the people that work there share some of those values. Now, you don't need to assume, but you can reasonably assume that you wouldn't necessarily work for a gambling company if you were against that, or you wouldn't work for a company that sold cigarettes if you were strongly against that. So there is some kind of clues, looking at things like recent news, so anything that can show changes in the company, and then talking about that in the interview. When interviewers feel like the candidate is well prepared, they kind of relax, and the candidate can almost take the driving seat. So they're like, oh, this is a really great candidate, I can kind of relax. So recently there was a candidate that had researched the turnover of the company, industry changes, and the manager that I interviewed with was so impressed by this. And from then, he was just a lot more relaxed than he was with other candidates, just because he kind of thought, oh yeah, this candidate kind of knows his stuff. And so, yeah, anything like, so let's say that there was an expansion of the company into a new industry, and you said, oh, I noticed recently when I was digging around before the interview that there's a new arm in the company, they've expanded into this area. How has that affected your team? Has that had any changes? Has that affected like you or your team in any way? And just little questions. That's maybe not the thinking that's the best of examples, but it's to show that there are things that you can ask that can connect you to the interviewer. So it can show your passion, so that you can connect with the interviewer on a level that isn't just the personal stuff or all of the things that we mentioned before. It can also be questions about the role, and then linking it back to, so how's that been for you? Because the manager could say, well, actually, it's been a really heavy workload, we've had to make these changes, and then you will learn more about the role, but you're also connecting with the interviewer at the same time.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting about this stuff because this is kind of a universal concept. It doesn't just apply in job interviews. It applies whenever you're networking, whenever you're doing informational interviews, wherever you're meeting new people, how to build rapport with people, how to make them enjoy interacting with you. And then when it's over, thinking like, wow, that person was great. Like that's the goal. Regarding the whole like researching the person, personally, I don't think like what you described, the golfing thing, I don't think that's necessarily bad, but it depends on how people go about doing it. Like, for example, like let's say I looked at somebody's LinkedIn profile or something, and then they volunteered that, they're a passionate golfer and this is how they golf or something. Or maybe they had a Facebook account or something that I don't know. I mean, I don't go on Facebook, but maybe they put all that because it's more personal stuff and it's not really business related. They put it into their Facebook profile, but their Facebook profile was public or something, like you could access that information. So it's obviously not like a major secret, and it's not super invasive to see that. But now how you would use that information in say a job interview, if they happen to be a recruiter and maybe I came in as a candidate, if I know that they're a passionate golfer, and let's say I had been, I don't know, maybe I'd been golfing twice or something as a total novice, but I have been golfing, and they say, well, what is a challenge that you've had to face or something like that. And I decided, okay, well, I know this person really cares about golfing. So maybe I could bring up the story about, I was asked to go golfing with this group at one point. I'd never been golfing before. It was completely new. But, I kind of took to it a bit, but this is how I felt at the beginning. Maybe as a point that I felt that they could relate to or they could speak to, I might bring that up. Personally, just as a personal preference, I think that would be okay. But what you had described, I kind of agree that, if they use it in the way you described, it's a little bit slimy. It's kind of not the thing you would want to necessarily do. It's just a bit creepy.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That the way you've described it could work really, really well. Especially if let's say that you love skiing, they happen to be a skiing expert, and they've put pictures of that on their LinkedIn or somewhere very public. I don't think there's anything wrong, because I guess you made a good point that you can connect on that topic. I think because I coach candidates, and one of the things that I've I've developed over the years is in how many ways can you eliminate risk when you're going into an interview, and when you're applying for a job. So, for example, I have this thing about pictures on resumes as an example. Now, I always say if you're in a country where it's expected, then add a picture. If you're not, like in the UK, then don't, because you want to eliminate the risk. So in an interview, I'm very careful about how I coach people on building connection, because people will interpret sometimes basic advice in different ways. And I think that it can go multiple ways. So like you say, it can work really, really well. So yeah, I think it's just doing it with care, because if there's a possibility that the person doesn't like it, then I think, well, try to eliminate that possibility if you can, and go with building a connection in other ways. So it's one of the ones that I consider to be a little risky, but yeah, if you use it sensibly, like you said, then it could work. It could work well. That's a good point.
I think that brings up a great point, which is people are variable. Like it takes all kinds to make a world. And, you do, like, for example, you brought up the putting a picture on a resume thing. Let's take that as an example. Now, I'm totally with you that, like, within certain industries, there's industry specific norms. So maybe in one industry or in one country, it's the norm not to put a picture on a resume. So like you said, if you do put a picture on your resume, it could be a risk factor. You risk people eliminating you because of your picture that you put, that if you hadn't put your picture, you'd have still been in the running. Alternatively, it could be a way to elevate yourself above the crowd. Like if you just do everything precisely average, precisely normal, like very, very safe, that can work as a strategy in certain situations, but in others, it may not be the thing. And the problem is, you talk to one interviewer, they like the fact you don't have a picture. You talk to another interviewer, turns out to be a hiring manager, and they liked your picture. So it's really hard to tell. So the only thing you can really do is go off, like, what's the norm for that industry, like you said.
Yeah.
And if the norm is that nobody puts pictures on resumes, and that will probably not be looked at favorably, then that's what you would go with, right? You look at sort of the norm for what you're doing.
And also you want to think about what if you're in in the UK, it's not required, should I say, it's not culturally required, because there are certain I think there are certain countries in Europe where it is, because I remember recruiting somewhere where there were a lot of applications from various places in Europe, and there were some countries where everyone that applied had a picture, and I assumed it's the cultural norm there.
Yeah.
But if you're in a place where it isn't the cultural norm, in most cases, I don't think it's that you can't add one, but you are essentially saying, I also want you to assess me by the way that I look, because you've added a picture. So it's things like that. It's kind of, what do you want to be assessed by? And then you're balancing that with what's normal where you are, whether it be that industry or that location. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is just for me personally, this is something that I've been fascinated by, because you get a lot of conflicting advice when it comes to this stuff. Like, what we're talking about today is building rapport. And one of the ways to build rapport, like we've mentioned a couple times, is, you sort of volunteer something people can relate to. Now, the problem is, yourself, but the person you're speaking to is an unknown. So you're taking a best guess at, like, well, hopefully they can relate to this story, this challenge I've had to overcome. And, you can play the odds and say, well, the odds are that they would be able to relate to this, and it wouldn't be much of a risk factor. But because people are variable, you end up talking to one person and it turns out they can't relate to that. And then they see your story of having to deal with that challenge as a liability. They walk away from hearing that story as, oh, this person, is struggling with this weakness.
Yeah.
It didn't create any rapport, and it just revealed a perceived weakness in that candidate. And that's always the problem with this stuff. So you're taking your best guess. If you wanted to play it really safe, you almost wouldn't reveal anything about you.
I mean, that's one way. And that's the thing, is the balance of playing it so safe that you don't stand out in a way, but then trying to stand out enough. But the
It's hard to
reality is,
elevate yourself above the crowd when you don't stand out in any way. Exactly.
it's true, it's true. But the
Yeah.
thing is, we're all unique, and that sounds really cheesy, but we're all unique. We have our own different aspects to our personality that make us us. And the thing about when you're practicing, when you put a lot of practice into interviews, you get used to uncovering what's unique about yourself. And so then you also learn how to present that when you are practicing your interviews, because you're always going to have something that will help you to stand out. And like you say, there is no 100% rule. So I can never say to someone, I guarantee you will get this job no matter what. I only base it on past success rates from clients, success rates for myself, kind of taking myself from a low success rate to a consistently high pass rate in interviews, and then saying, oh, let me teach that to other people, and then seeing other people get loads of great results and saying, this will very, very likely work. But there's like you say, there's more than one way, and there is never 100% guarantee, of course. So yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's a numbers game, on because you're always dealing with somebody different. What I think is interesting, not to like just go off on a tangent or anything, but like in the world of sales, like salespeople, a lot of outside salespeople, that their job is to go and like always talk to new people all the time. Like they're always talking to a stranger, and the problem is because you're dealing with this person, you don't know who they are. You don't know where they're coming from. You don't know what their biases or their experiences have been, what they find relatable, what they don't. Is that the salespeople in general are trained to ask questions. So before you volunteer something, you might ask a question and say, like, have you been at this company long? And they say, oh yeah, I've been here for 25 years. So you go, okay, this person might be able to relate to a story I have about being somewhere for a long time and the challenges of that, right? So I get information from them first before I reveal the thing that I'm hoping will create some rapport, rather than just walking into a room, having a stranger there, and then I just pick something to say while they're a complete unknown. So I think that's really interesting. If you can ask a few questions in the beginning that maybe get some insight into who you're talking to, that will help frame anything you reveal for the purposes of creating rapport or otherwise. I think that's something but that might be a bit more advanced for people. I'm not sure if that's kind of advice you would give a beginner or something.
Probably a beginner or someone that is really struggling with interviews in terms of nerves and what to say. I may not initially, like I would say that that's excellent advice for people that feel a little more experienced in interviews, because it's more about coming up with something on the spot. And if you ask someone a question and they answer, some people freeze immediately. They just don't know how to follow that up with something. Their mind goes blank. They don't know what to say in response to that. So let's say someone says, oh, you've been here long. And they say, oh, I've been here 25 years. And their mind goes blank and they don't know what to say. So they say, oh, right, okay. And it's, I saw a video just like this recently about a politician, no name, but they were asking questions to someone and they didn't really know what to say in response. So the person answered the question. I think the question was which was, how long have you worked here? And the person said, and they said, great. And that's kind of the answer to everything.
Yeah,
and
it
just was
ends, right? No flow.
Yeah, exactly. So and so it's, I would only give that advice to someone who's a bit more comfortable in interviews, because when you're more relaxed, you don't have as much of a challenge with remembering what you wanted to say and brain freeze, like when your brain just freezes up in the moment. So
yeah. No, that's great. I think that for a lot of people, what might be very useful would be to practice having a conversation with someone, like going up and asking people questions and trying to get them to talk enthusiastically about something. Like if you say, for example, you walk into a job interview and, you shake hands or, whatever the protocol is for the greeting. And people still shake hands, right? Like in the UK
Yeah.
right now, the COVID thing is kind of over and people still go back to shaking hands, right?
Yeah. Well, I do
Okay.
anyway, but yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. There's still a little bit of weirdness about that over here. Anyway, but
Oh, okay.
so you go into a room, you shake hands, you say like, hello, how's your day going, or something like that. And then the
Hmm.
person will say some kind of thing. Oh, it's not too bad, And if they're in the mood for a conversation, they may volunteer something. They say, oh, I don't know, I had a rough morning because my car broke down or something.
Hmm.
But, and you say, oh, yeah, I know. Isn't that the worst thing ever? And, blah, blah. And then you get a little sort of free flowing conversation going about that. And that can really help create rapport, and you have a free flowing conversation going. But you're not volunteering anything. You're just sort of like asking the person a series of questions. And sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. If people just want to get down to business, they sort of shut that down, and it doesn't really go anywhere. So how do you respond if someone does that? Do you engage with that, or do you just kind of like, take a seat and let's begin, kind of thing?
Well, I would normally, when I meet someone in an interview, like if I'm being interviewed,
Hmm.
I'm kind of assessing the person with every interaction.
Hmm.
Sounds a little
Yep.
kind of like but I'm assessing them with every interaction. So if I did that and they kind of said, yeah, it was great. Oh, how was your weekend? Did you have a good one? And they say, yeah, it was great. They don't elaborate. I
Yeah.
would not continue to say, what did you do? I wouldn't continue that strain. I think it's one of two things. They either don't want to share specifically about that topic, or their character they may be the type of person who likes to get down to the point in general. It may not be that topic. It may just be that they are a facts and figures person. They like to get straight down to the detail, which is why in when you're preparing for an interview, it really helps to almost compartmentalize what you prep for. So make sure that you know your CV and your dates. You can talk through it fluidly. Make sure that you've looked at the key responsibilities, you know the key things, make sure that you understand the duties of the role, because you might get somebody who building a rapport and a connection with them is more about being sharp on those topics. So
Hmm.
if I get somebody like that, then won't push the topic, that we'll start the interview, and then I make sure that my responses are detailed, to the point, and I will assess how they respond to that. And if they seem to be impressed or giving me some kind of body language or indication by their responses that they are impressed by that, then I'm learning this person is somebody who likes to get to they don't like fluff. They don't want to talk about their dog and my pet and whatever else. They want to talk about the role and they want to get to the point. So it's more just about the person and assessing them as you go along, and then adjusting how you react accordingly.
Yeah, that's true. I've encountered people like that, and I've also been that person, as I recall, to my
Oh,
shame, a couple times, where you're like, "Hey, how's it going? It's great to meet you," and they're like, "Fine, have a seat." It's like, okay, right? It's like,
yeah,
oh, shut down.
yeah.
But like then. What I might try and do, if you're still in the mood to talk to this person, is if they have a question for you, they say like, okay, tell me about yourself. Or they would say,
Mm,
tell me about a time that, this happened or something. You kind of answer the question, but you end with a question back to them. You say, oh,
mm-hmm,
they say, tell me about a time this happened. And you say, oh, well, there was this one time where this happened and this is how I handled it. Has that ever happened to you? Or something like that. And then
mm,
as an attempt to sort of get them to, engage in a little free flowing conversation with you.
yeah,
Um, I
yeah.
mean, I don't know personally beyond those two things what you could do to try and stimulate a conversation between the two of you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Well,
is there
there's
anything else like you could do? What would you do if you were in that position? Like,
well, if I was determined to build, because some people they don't like to build a connection in that way,
yeah,
so they don't want to feel interviewed, or but they like to be able to get detailed answers from the other person. So impressing them is more about that, and just following their lead on that, and not kind of if I was like, I definitely want to build a connection with this person, then I would use the part of the interview where I could ask questions. So I would use that part where they say, any questions for me, or it's normally at the end of the interview, and I would ask those similar questions to what I mentioned before, like, what would you say is the most challenging thing about working here, and what's your favorite thing about working here? And then they kind of have to answer something that is kind of personal, because what's their favorite thing? It's under the guise of, I just want to learn about, what it's like to work here from your perspective. But it has to be something personal, because to some degree, it's very rare that people will answer that question by saying, the work, I enjoy the work, that's my favorite thing. Like, I've never had that answer. People always get a little personal.
I
And
enjoy the Christmas party.
yeah, but
Just stone-faced,
yeah,
period. And that's it. Yeah. I mean,
exactly.
kind of hard to develop a rapport when the person is behaving like that. That's
Yeah.
very challenging. You want them, it's almost like they're a block of ice and you're trying to, get them to warm a little.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I would say that comes to mind for me is, if the interviewer does anything to you or extends any kind of courtesy to you,
Mm-hmm.
thank them for it. Not in a fake way or an ingratiating way, but just, if they said, like, I don't know, say you showed up early, like you were talking about before, and they said, you know, uh, it's great that you're here. Would you like to come through here and wait in this room here? It's a lot more comfortable, or something like that. You would thank them for that. You'd say, like, well, thank you very much. A lot of people don't do that. When like, I've been to several job interviews, and this is the first time anyone's asked me to come in and wait in another area that was a lot nicer. So I appreciate that. Something like
Yeah.
that. If they do anything for you, they make sure that you thank them.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't involve asking a question, doesn't involve sharing a story. It's just like that's the other thing I think that you can do. I mean, I can't think of
Mm-hmm.
anything else beyond that one would do to try and get rapport with somebody who wasn't really responding to questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Take any opportunity. Like, that's a really great example, actually. Just taking any opportunity to connect like that, like saying, oh, thank you so much, I've not had that before. Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. But yeah, I think, other than trying it once, ending your answer with a question, and also using that opportunity where you can ask questions at the end, to ask those questions to the interviewer and build rapport in that section. Sometimes an interview can go really quickly because it's gone really well, or maybe really badly, and you get to that section, and then that section takes another 45 minutes, because the interviewer, some of the questions you've asked have really opened up the interviewer. So that section, I'd say, of where they say, do you have any questions for me before we finish? Ask something specific about the role, as well, to show that you have been paying attention. But I would highly recommend that you always ask at least one question about the interviewer. So just something, what's your journey? What's your career journey been like? Can you tell me a bit about your background? Get them talking about themselves in some way or another. What's kept you here for as long as you have?
That's a
What's your
great
favorite thing?
example. That's a great example. Like what you said, like about, telling a candidate about the role. So you're the
Mm-hmm.
candidate, and the recruiter or the interviewer takes the trouble to give you a good picture of what this role will involve, right? So as a
Mm-hmm.
candidate, you could say, well, that's really informative, and I appreciate you giving me that detailed information about, precisely what this role is. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people really don't give that, but you took the trouble to do this, and I really appreciate that. That helps me out tremendously, or something like that. And then hopefully, the point of saying all that is that the other person kind of warms to you, and they go, oh, well, my pleasure. It's really not a problem. And they think more favorably about you. So that, like, anytime they do any little thing like that, they give you additional information about the role, things that technically they didn't technically have to do. You thank them for that. You call them on it and say, wow, that's great. Um, you know, Beyond this stuff, like you said, like, you said something that's stuck with me. It's that some people don't like to be involved in conversation. They want to get down to business. They want to be able to ask questions and get the technical answers.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I've encountered those people. And on some days, I have treated others like that. I'm not
Yeah.
very proud of that, but because you're stressed out or whatever, and you just want to skip all the pleasantries, you want to just get down to it. Very challenging to create rapport in that, but I think a lot of people can relate to that situation.
Yeah, I can relate. I've been that too when I've either done a lot of interviews that day, or whatever has happened. Like you say, I just like, let's get to the point. What I find, and this is specific to my personality, so it could be different, is what when the person comes to the interview well prepared, their answers are good, I can start to kind of relax in the interview, and I'm a lot more, whereas if they come to the interview late, they don't seem to really understand what the job is. Their answers are very just indicate that they haven't prepared at all. Then I kind of just want to get through the interview. Whereas if they come across really well, if they've prepared and they're asking insightful questions, that personally just kind of opens me up a bit, because I feel like, oh, I may have actually found someone that is suitable, and that as a recruiter, that is something that would get me more engaged. So that's just a personal thing. But yeah, I'd say some of the suggestions that you've had before about some of the questions you can ask and things like that can be quite good.
Yeah, I agree. So, um, showing enthusiasm, right?
Yes, yeah,
Talked about
that's
that.
key. This, even if you're not naturally enthusiastic, because not everyone has the same personality. And you were saying earlier about recording yourself, and you might realize that you come across in a certain way, and you can either tweak it, or you can say, actually, I feel more confident because I do come across quite confident.
Do the thing where you record yourself, and then while you're watching the video back, you realize like this is boring. I don't even want to listen to myself. You know, that might be a red flag, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, so you have to inject some enthusiasm into it, a bit of energy into it.
yeah.
uh, yeah, people warm to that. People warm to the fact if you're there and you kind of look bored, and you look like you're just really not interested in what's going
Mm.
on. That's I think you'll agree. I mean, that's an instant turnoff pretty much universally, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has a level that if you were turning up your excitement times 10, maybe not times 10, but if you were kind of doubling it at least, then and then we take
Drink
that back.
10
But
Red Bulls and then go to your job interview.
if you were, no matter whether you're naturally enthusiastic or not, you can always add on a bit more to just to demonstrate that your interest. So genuine excitement about the role in the or the industry, and even things like referencing things specifically in the job description without being prompted. Like, let's say, pick any interview question. If like, give me an example of a time when you struggled with this or whatever, and you're answering it, and you give your example, and you say at the end, well, and that's the thing that excited me about this role. I saw in the job description that you had this, and that was something that I dealt with before, in this
That's really
challenging
good.
situation. So, but you can pick any interview. It actually works for any interview question, I guess, because I'm almost like an interview question algorithm myself. Like, by now, I can do it with any question, but practice will get you there. It really is just practice. I didn't start out being great at interviews just from the beginning. So yeah.
That's great advice, like that. Like, find the element of the role that is genuinely interesting and exciting to you. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, the job might involve like 20 things. They've said 20 things about the job in the
Mm,
job posting, and maybe one or two of those is actually interesting to you, like it's exciting. So if there's one or two of those, go down to the job interview and tell
mm,
them that, and say like,
yeah.
oh, this thing here, I understand that this role involves this. I think that's great, because I really like doing this. I find that there's a lot of untapped potential there. I find that with a bit of innovation, we can really use that to solve a lot of problems, and blah blah blah.
Mm,
And talk about this and show the excitement that you have for that thing. Right now,
mm.
there may not be many of those, but there might be one or two. So make sure that for the people watching, make sure you say those to the interviewer, and that shows genuine excitement, and they will like that, right? Like,
Yes,
you know,
yes, they'll love that. And the way that you said it just now with the innovation, etc., it comes across really authentic, especially when you tack it onto the end of something else you're saying. It's like, you didn't ask me about this, but I'm just adding it onto the end of my answer. Like, give the answer first, and then go on to, this is this, and that's the reason why I was so passionate about this role.
yeah. Well, as a recruiter, what do you want? Do you want a candidate that is really excited about the role? They're not just
Hmm.
there because they need a job, that they're excited about this specific role.
Yes.
They're passionate about doing that kind of work. They enjoy doing that kind of work. They are passionate about the company or that work environment or the opportunities that could bring to them.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like what else? Like I'm sure there's a lot of like, what do you look for? What do you hope for when a candidate comes in front of you?
I
Beyond what
think
I've said.
I mean, it can depend on the role. So if I'm interviewing a head of department, I'm looking for something different than somebody going into their first job as, say, a customer services advisor. But in a blanket level, and this is the basics because I see it still so often today, it just never
Mm.
goes away, is prepare, is the prep. Lack of prep, the amount of lack of prep is shocking in interviews. It's, there's so much information on it on the internet, and the amount of people that don't prep. So for example, you're talking about sales. I remember an interview a long time ago where we interviewed someone in sales who didn't know their targets, they didn't know their metrics. So in sales, a big
Mm.
thing is your performance, so knowing how you performed against certain targets. So let's say as a salesperson you were supposed to get 4 sales a day, or you were supposed to bring in £50,000 a month. If you say, "Oh, I don't actually remember my targets, and I don't remember exactly how I performed to those targets," in sales, that's a bit of a red flag.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody who knows their numbers and how they performed. It in in some sales roles, not in all, but in many sales roles, the salesperson can't wait to talk about how they performed. They can't wait to talk about how well they perform, because that's part of sales in many aspects. So
And they
this.
take pride in it too,
Oh,
presumably. Yeah. Yeah.
sure. And you remember the numbers. I remember I used to work in sales a long time ago, and I remember I once hit 127% of my target. I still remember that today, and that was over a decade ago, because I remember the exact number
Pretty
because I
good.
was so proud of it. And that's normally what it is. When someone says, "I think I was around this," and it wasn't even long ago, and I just think you must have known that you'd be asked this in an interview. In this industry, it's really normal. So think about, even in HR, I could go on. I've got so many examples, but people not knowing what they studied, what level they studied at. When the HR qualification in the UK, the norm is the CIPD, and there's 3 levels that you can do, and it's a basic level, an intermediate level, or advanced. So it's either for someone that's a director at an advanced level, someone that is just entering the industry, or someone that's been in the industry for a while. And so I interviewed somebody who couldn't remember what they studied, and they did it 2 years before that. And I
Oh,
thought, you've got to prepare. You're going to be asked about that in HR. If you say you're qualified, someone might ask you that. And I wasn't even asking the candidate to catch them out. I was genuinely interested, because it tells me about where that person might want to go in their career. If they've done a senior level, but they are only entering the industry, then it tells me that one day they might want to progress in the industry. So I was just asking that question. So I kind of relaxed the candidate a bit, and I said, "Oh, I'm not asking that to catch you out, by the way. I'm just interested in where you wanted to go in your career." And I just told them what it is I was looking for. And I remember this candidate was like, I don't know I don't remember what level I got to, which was, it was a very unusual answer. No one I know in HR that has done that qualification doesn't know what level they did. So
yeah, yeah.
those
That
types of
tends
things.
to give the impression that it wasn't important to them. They
Yeah,
weren't engaged. It's not something they really think about or care about.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's not the image you want to project, obviously.
no,
Uh, no, interesting stuff. Um, so okay, so let's maybe perhaps start to wrap this up. So we're talking about
sure.
rapport. Hopefully, everyone here understands the importance of rapport. It's super important. It's also, like we discussed earlier, a way of leveling the playing field. So if perhaps you're not the most technically accomplished person, you could do the job, but there is conceivably a lot of people that maybe have more experience than you or something. This can be the big sort of leveling factor. You can impress them in this area, and that can make up for a multitude of perceived sins in other areas. We talked about what do we talk about? Sort of ways to build rapport
Hmm.
beyond basic things like appearing pleasant, smiling, making eye contact, being engaged.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Asking questions, giving examples, um, saying things that the person presumably can relate to. It's your best guess that they can relate to a story or a challenge that you've had to overcome.
Hmm.
Um, And that accompanied a whole discussion of like what types of things to volunteer or stories to share, sharing values, doing research. You said a moment ago that a big sin that a lot of people have is they don't prepare as much. You mentioned being familiar with your own accomplishments and your own work history. Does that
Yeah.
also extend to doing research on the company? Do you find that that's a common thing where people don't do enough research on the role or the employer, or
Yes.
not so much?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I've kind of accepted that if I ask someone, so what do you know about this company? Or the manager asks them, I kind of accept that at least 50% of the time it will be a poor answer. And that's, I'm being very generous with that 50%.
Hmm.
It's for some reason, it's just not something that a lot of people seem to include in their interview prep. And it could be, and part of it is not just that they don't want to do it or they couldn't be bothered. Sometimes it's nerves. So they may
Hmm.
have looked it up, but they are so nervous that
They
they
can't
don't
retain it.
remember. And often nerves can be counteracted somewhat by extensive prep. So
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the reason I say extensive is because what's the point? Like you have to do a lot to get to an interview stage. The CV, the screening calls, the everything you have to do. Ironing your suit the day before, looking up the travel, all the things that you have to do in prep to just go to the interview and just to get an interview, to get in there and then not be able to answer really common questions like what do you know about our company. It's sometimes I think, well, there's more that you can do. So there's much more that you can do. Make sure that you nail those questions. There
In
was a
your in
candidate
your
recently who
experience,
actually nailed that question.
what should people know about the company?
So people, it depends on the role that you're going for a little. So somebody answering this, going for a finance director's role, I would expect to give a slightly different answer to someone that again is coming into to the first, into their first job. But things like knowing, let's say a 15 to 20-second summary on what that company does. So you can get that basic from their website. So, if they're a group company, know who else is in the group. You might be questions about who are their competitors, who are their main competitors, things like what their values are. So many companies have like their values or their ethos. Know that. You really need to know what that is.
And you're talking about the posted values that are on the
Yeah.
corporate part of the website. That's what you're talking about?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. Know those values, know a bit of the history of the company. So, is there anything key about the founders or how it was founded? Overall, if somebody says, what do you know about our company? You want to comfortably be able to talk for at least 45 seconds, I'd say. On average, you want to be able to comfortably talk that long. And they can stop you if they need to at 30 seconds or whatever, but maybe a minute. Let's just round it off to a minute. Say you want to comfortably be able to talk for a minute. So, do your digging, practice answering that question, and it should cover a minute. And if it doesn't, then do a little bit more digging. Look at their LinkedIn and look at recent news and include those things, etc.
Do you typically expect the candidate to essentially have the job posting memorized, like all the key points of the role, of the requirements, of anything else that was mentioned in the job posting? Is that what you specifically look for, or that's, if they have it on the table in front of them for reference or something, if is that okay, or what's your
Uh, I
opinion on
don't expect them to have all of it memorized. I
that?
would say, if I'm coaching someone, I'd say at least 2 or 3 key points from each section. So 2 or 3 key, like what are the main. So when they say this is what we're looking for in the candidate, what are the non-negotiables? Make sure you know what they are. From the duty section of the job description or the key responsibilities, make sure that you understand 3 or 4 of the key ones. I'd say it helps to have those memorized, but not everything, because it's sometimes a job description is very long.
Yeah.
Having it on the table, you can, but it can sometimes come across a little like you haven't spent any time preparing, because if you can look at it while you're there, then it can give that impression, but it's not the end of the world. If you bring a copy with you, it's not the end of the world, but it does look better and it's more smoother and fluid conversation wise to memorize a few of the key points beforehand.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. So do you have anything else that you feel is part of this discussion about creating rapport, how to do it, why it's important, beyond stuff we've covered? so far. I think we've covered quite a few different elements here today.
We have, and I say there's probably only one more thing, which is
Yeah.
about, which you did mention earlier, but it's about your why. So what's your reason for being in that role, or for interviewing for that role or industry? You could have applied for any other role, and maybe you have applied for many, but if you've chosen to accept that interview and go, there's got to be a reason. So what is your why for wanting to be in that role or in that industry? What's kept you in the industry if you're already in it, or if you're not, if you're just starting out on the job market, why are you interested in it? Think about that, because that is one of the things that can set you apart. The chances that it's going to be identical to other candidates, it's quite low. So that is a way that you can separate yourself. And yeah, what you could have chosen another career path. So what's your why? That's the last thing for me.
Okay, that makes sense. Right on. So hopefully everybody understands why rapport is such an important thing. I know there's a lot, like being a technical introvert myself, I know there's a lot of introverts out there, a lot of technical people, that this is just really not on their radar. And I think the problem is, number one, like I said earlier, they haven't really been educated on this. No one's ever told them like that this is going to be a major point, in selecting who gets hired for things. The other thing I think is because they tend to devalue it. Speaking as an introvert, maybe technical person, you figure like, okay, I have the technical skills, so that should be all I need, right, to do this job.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a huge part of it. But the problem is, if people can't communicate with you, if people really don't want to go talk to you because they don't like you, because maybe you're very gruff, or you can't communicate properly or appropriately, that's going to be a real hindrance. So
Yeah.
being able to have people like you and want to work with you is very important. And that's why in a job interview, in my opinion, that's why it's not a bad thing that this is a criterion of how you get hired. Because if you care about this and you put some effort into it, it shows that you understand the importance of this, and that's going to be very important on the job.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say
Yeah.
to that. Do you have any
Yeah,
concluding remarks for this, or?
No, just lots of practice will help you to build rapport while you're in the interview. So that's my last thing. Please practice, please prep, and keep going. And that's pretty much it for me.
Right on. Excellent. So thank you to
Thank
Amri
you.
for doing this. Yeah, and hopefully we'll have the chance to do this more in the future. And thank you to, I see there's 22 people here. Thank you for joining us today. Haven't got many questions today, which is interesting. But if you do have any questions for us, either of us, on this topic or on any other topic, or your recommendations for what we should cover in the future, please let us know in the comments. If you're watching this on my channel, in the description box, there's a link to Amri Celeste's YouTube channel, Interview Coach Amri Celeste. Go check out her channel. She's got some great videos on various HR related and interviewing topics. And I will be back next week at this time for another edition of Career Expert Roundtable. And I believe, Amri, you're slated to join me next week.
Yes, I am. Yeah, thank you very much for that, by the way. And yes, I'll join you as well next week. So
thank you for doing this. Awesome. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.